And we are live. How are we doing, fellas? You having a good week so far?
Not too bad, not too bad.
I'm doing
All
great.
right. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I like it when people are doing great. I'm having a pretty decent week. There's some things going on here at the farm, building up for this incoming fall season and the whole agritourism bit because that's how we're able to make it work at this point. So anyway, while we let some folks straggle in and come and jump in, on top of it being a great week because of stuff I'm doing, I came home and I had a lovely little package. It was this guy right here. This is the not reprint. Bob and Books got a hold of me when I said it was a reprint. I don't know, a month and a half, a couple months ago. They said, "Sir, it's a retranslation. It is a retranslation of Raspiel's Camp of the Saints. It's brand new. They looked at it. They tried to, how do I give them the most justice on here? They wanted to make sure that they were accurately portraying and communicating what was originally written to the 21st century audience. That is not like the Message Bible or anything of that. It's not a dumbing down of what's going on there necessarily. It is a what is actually being said by Raspiel, and then how do we communicate that right now? So I have not yet gotten into it. You can get it everywhere. I imagine you could get it through Barnes and Nobles. You could certainly get it through Amazon. I pre-ordered it through them. But I think Bobbin might also have their own store. That I'm not totally sure of, but go ahead and look in them. And then I will actually update the Widget Digit just to have a link there. It's not any stupid affiliate link or anything. But I'll try and get something in there so you can copy and paste. Because I don't think I have live links yet. With all that having been said, tonight we are going to learn about and pontificate and discuss the whole Hicklib phenomenon, which I'm excited to get into because, frankly, I don't know that I have a great handle on it. I have an idea of where I think it's going. But Arthur, if you want to take the lead on this, jump in, explain to us who the Hicklib is, what's this phenomena we're talking about, and what we're doing.
Certainly. Thank you, Panda. Yeah, so the most observations I make of, the curious critter we call the Hicklib is within the political punditry class. What we're talking about when I say that is within journalism, media, academics, and within the professional classes. But I really want to focus in on discussing about the existence of this within the mainstream political punditry class. It isn't a novel observation to say that the treatment around the discussions on rural America by mainstream political punditry class is by and large unkind. Shocking, I know, flyover country. People in the Midwest, the South especially, are derided with stereotypes of being racist, backwards in their thinking, and strung out on hillbilly heroin. We're not being criticized for these things. For these pathologies, most of the cosmopolitan coverage will shift to mocking the ideas of tradition, ties to the land and family, and having honor in one's conduct. Mainstream media seems to look at flyover country and the people within there almost as an afterthought, an unnecessary part of America, as if it is the gristle and fat of the true steak. What they look at is the powerhouses of Los Angeles, New York City, DC, of course. That's where things happen. And things that happen in flyover country are just kind of just looked at like over there. And that's understandable. And this is not late breaking news. It's not shocking to say that, oh, wow, rural America is treated a bit unkind by mainstream media and its sycophants. That's not the shocking news. What's shocking to many of us, myself included, being a native of Texas, is the ones who come from those areas, who get into those positions and seem to have a deeper level of vitriol and resentment for the people they came from than the professional liberal class itself. I mean, it's one thing to read, articles or, a commentary from say, a writer in New York Times who born and raised their whole life in New York City, and say they're discussing something in West Virginia or something going on in Mississippi or in Missouri. Yes, it's understood. That's not their land, not their people, not their way of life. And it's going to have that kind of slant to it. It's going to have that bend. But it's still, even after all these years, shocking to read those types of articles or introspection from someone who is from that area, from that culture, and how they seem to go 10 times harder on things. This is not about excusing, you know, bad pathologies, drug use in the rural areas or bad behavior, crime or anything like that. It's not about excusing it, but it's about the treatment of the topics themselves. And a really good example of that I have today is Kevin Williamson. He's a writer for National Review, but he's written in many other places. And then an article came out, and this is 9 years ago, in National Review, and he titled "The Father Furor," about Trump, but he was also talking about problems happening in the Rust Belt states and within those cities. And he focuses in on a small town in New York, way far away from the city, that was known for mining gypsum and how there had been many problems. And what he's doing, he was actually going off of another article that had been written about the city and its residents. And he goes over the top, though, with saying it's their fault. Just move. Just get out of there. Doesn't bring up any solutions at all whatsoever for the area itself. But he saves his most harshest vitriol at the end about what their actual problem is. And it doesn't come down to economics. It doesn't come down to looking at solutions, seeing the nation as an extended family, which he derides earlier in the essay in itself. He mocks the idea of there even being the idea of a globalist globalism and globalization affecting them whatsoever. He says, nothing happened to them. There wasn't some awful disaster. There wasn't a war or a famine or a plague or a foreign occupation. Even the economic changes of the past few decades do very little to explain the dysfunction and negligence and the incomprehensible malice of poor white America. So the gypsum business in Garbutt ain't what it used to be. There is more to life in the 21st century than wallboard and cheap sentimentality about how the man closed the factories down. The truth about these dysfunctional downscale communities is that they deserve to die. Economically, they are negative assets. Morally, they are indefensible. Forget all your cheap theatrical Bruce Springsteen crap. Forget your sanctimony about struggling Rust Belt factory towns and your conspiracy theories about the wily Orientals stealing our jobs. Forget your GD gypsum, and if he has a problem with that, forget Ed Burke too. The white American underclass is enthralled to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. I still remember the first time I read those words. And honestly, I was shocked. And that was nearly 10 years ago. And I don't recall in what I could look up, I could not recall seeing the exact kind of time point where the Hicklib came into the lexicon for this type of person. But I remember reading that, and of course, looking up the author, Kevin Williamson, going, "Wow, this guy from Berkeley, he went really hard against them. This is harsh," or thinking he was from some progressive, uh, you know, very liberal city. No, he's from Amarillo, Texas, a town I've gone through probably about 100 times in my lifetime easily, and that is just, I think, the most stark example of what you would call a Hicklib. It does not even have to be someone of an ideological bent of the left or the right, but someone, in my opinion, that comes from these areas, comes from those communities, gets up into a certain position, and has some of the harshest commentary for people that they grew up with. There is no compassion to that he writes. There's no, Well, here's some other solutions. It's no, just get a U-Haul and leave. Leave everything. Who cares if you have the family cemetery down the street that has, over 6 generations in the ground? Who cares if, the local church was built by your great grandfather? None of that matters because it's, everything is just stock economics in that article. It's not USA, it's GDP to him. And so that's what I think of a Hicklib. Someone who just they they almost as if you could almost say a traitor, because it's not about saying, well, that they criticize things. No, there's criticism, there's commentary, and then there's just all out vitriol. And so that's what I'd like to talk about tonight, and throw it back over to Panda to see if he wants to take it over to Otto or not on how a Hicklib is created. Thank you.
All right, so Arthur, I'm going to ask you some questions, and then as you answer them, Otto, you go ahead and jump in on the backside and tell me if there's any more nuance or any difference in opinion with Arthur. So I, it's not a perfect metric, but I'm thinking Williamson. It's a Scottish surname, and that's part of what throws me. And then you had mentioned the South, and I know part of this week I was trying to delineate the Hicklib as we're trying to describe this. Is this something that is this a person that is native to the South? Frankly, that is oftentimes what we would refer to as a heritage American. Is it somebody that is even pre-German, pre-continental Europeans in the U.S.? Is that primarily the idea that these are, again, heritage Americans, pre-continentals that we're talking about, or has that been your experience?
I could agree to that. Yeah. I mean, someone specifically who has, as you say, ancestral ties to the land, heritage, founding American, that still can look at disdain about it. And I also have some ideas on why they have that worldview and what changes their attitude to that.
So yeah, and I'm thinking I have. Uh, well, let's do it this way. So I was a Great Lakes kid growing up, and that's primarily where I did most of my growing up, was around the Great Lakes. And so I ran into something a little bit similar to that, but we'll dig into that somewhat in coming minutes. Otto, you got any thoughts on this? Is this not exclusively a Southern thing, but is this a noticeable contingent, a noticeable minority within the South? And do you think the heritage American aspect plays into a proper Hicklib?
So I would say that a Hicklib is generally what we refer to as somebody that comes from a rural area and gets liberalized. I would think that they would I would think that it doesn't exactly matter where they come from well, I think they could come from the Midwest or the South, maybe out west to some degree. Um Prerequisite being more like a rural area, I think. Maybe somewhere that's historically was, Confederate or Confederate controlled. So anyway, on that, I think that a Hicklib can they have to be white, but I think they could be just about any ethnic group of white because, really the whole idea is that they're usually a normal white man, or I guess you could say a normal white girl, and they seem normal, they look normal, but then they just kind of sort of break away. I've seen probably about 3 examples off the top of my head I could think of, and one is just the fruits of feminism. Um, 2
Yeah. So
is just,
real quick, let
people
me
being
jump in on
kinda
that.
here, go ahead, jump in.
Well, I'm curious, and Arthur, you jump in on this too. Do you guys think that the Hicklib is this distinct from feminism, in that when we say Hicklib, can it be a woman, or are we primarily talking about men? Because is feminism something different, or are they intertwined?
No, I would say it's intertwined. I was going to get more into my views on how one is created. It really goes back to the resentment of your area, because you can have a lot of people who grow up, they're really good in school, and they'll come back home and it'll be kind of like hometown boy makes good, and they don't talk bad about, and they don't have that attitude about where they came from. It's a part of them. But really, I think for the Hicklib in itself, and yeah, I believe it could be a male or a female. It's really someone who leaves their area and doesn't doesn't want to even acknowledge it. I can recall throughout my life running into people and then finding out that, they were from Texas, and I would say, "Oh, all right, a fellow Texan," and then be immediately corrected with, "I'm not a Texan. No, no, I grew up in Texas, but I live here now." And this was in California, especially, but it's a total uh, refusal to really even want to acknowledge that part. And it really comes back, it's not even really about an educational attainment level, because there's plenty of people who go to college, go get, bachelor's, master's, doctorate degrees, and don't exhibit these qualities. But it is a part of it, because you have to think they were already resentful because of, say, the small pond they were in, and possibly maybe got a little bit of ribbing from people around them because they felt different. And once they get out of that bubble and get into the college life, it kind of really becomes the camouflage game. And so it almost seems to go over the top with your criticisms of how things are back at home, or your ideas. You do that in front of the progressive liberal crowd, you're peacocking, because you're trying to show them, I am one of you, I am not one of those that came from there. So it's almost in a way that it's it's a performative act. But as that one article shows from Kevin Williamson, it can go way too far, where you almost just want to start cutting parts off the tree entirely if it doesn't agree with your worldview.
Sure. So, Otto, I cut you off a little bit about that. You want to finish digging into that, and then you had mentioned the girls, so I'm assuming you agree with Arthur that it can be both men and women under the umbrella of Hicklib.
Yes, but I think it depends on. I think when I say it depends on the person, I think it depends on the girl, especially. Like the example I know of, I can think of a person who was a cheerleader that sort of just kind of went. Well, actually, there's two of them I can think of, and one of them became a lesb, and the other just kind of is sort of kind of spread around that she's liberal in thought, and it kind of sort of it doesn't make sense thinking about it. I'd say for a guy, it can be sort of any background, but I mean, no offense to women that like this, but I mean, if you're kind of like not really attractive and you got like glasses and you're just, in the band and then you're just liberal, it's just kind of assumed, you're just assumed to be like that, or you're emo. Stuff like that is not hick lib material for women. I think they have to specifically be a normal female that basically goes feral and, um, yeah, just sort of starts voting for like Joe Biden.
Sure. So I'm going to throw out a situation. You guys tell me if this. What I'm trying to delineate too is if this is unique to the Hicklib, or if this is a manifestation of a other of an other common issue. So where I grew up, again, it was Great Lakes area. It was not particularly rural. It was It was small town America, is what we could say. But this does. It was almost post rural. It had been an agricultural county, and then eventually they had moved past that by and large, and they had been not quite subsumed by the greater city, but it had certainly become a weekend town. So folks would do all their work up in the city, and then they would spend their weekends there. in that particular suburb, in that town, in that county. What happened is that there were a lot of kids from that county and from similar counties where I grew up, and they would grow up, and there would just be a lot of disdain from them in regards to the area, in regards especially to the church and to being involved in that. Most of these kids, I grew up in an evangelical family, so most of these kids grew up evangelical, and then many of them went to Christian universities, and then eventually got to a point where they said, all of this is stupid. All of this is stupid, and whatever. They came up with their different frustrations and their different critiques of where they had grown up. And the reason I'm putting that sort of as a contrast is because I want to focus. I really want to dig into the Hick portion of this and see if we can figure out why this happens, and if it is distinct, or if it's just similar of people turning into adults and then bitching about where they came from. Because again, where I came from, not rural, but a lot of these folks still had their critiques and complaints. And one of the things that they would do too is they would say, well, I came from small town America. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't come from rural America. And someone would try to paint themselves as if they had. And I never understood that. So anyway, do you think that we're talking about the same thing? Or do you think that there is a distinction, either a formal distinction or a functional distinction in the targets of the Hicklib that really sort of tease out this rural aspect?
Real quick on that before I lose my train of thought, as you bring that up, talking about growing up and seeing, whether vacation Bible school, growing up in the country and stuff. One of the best examples of a writer and commentator using his background almost kind of as a smokescreen for the critiques would be David French. I don't know if anyone is familiar with David French, New York Times writer. Uh, he's kind of really known in the political circles for his everything he writes nowadays. It's like, what's he saying now? Because he's become a trope for the conservative case for insert whatever fads going on in progressive world at the time. He was the one who was advocating, of course, for legalizing gay marriage, and he's just kind of gone downhill from there. He can always talk about the positives to the transsexual lifestyles and everything else. But the key point on this that really just makes it Johnny obvious as a Hicklib is how he tries to insert these little stories from growing up in Alabama or growing up in small town and rural areas, and trying to justify, like, and this is why this was bad and why it needs to be this way now. And it's basically saying, I have the bona fides. Look at my credentials. Not only am I educated Ivy League and work at New York Times, but I'm a country boy too. So you should listen to me, even if his ideas are damaging, even if they're destructive, even if it is just dyed in the wool, progressive liberalism, far left stuff. He still thinks that it gives him some sort of cover to say that, because he still pretends he's a man of the country, of the piney woods or something. Or that's one thing they definitely use, Panda, is almost as credentialism to say, I speak kick, so this is why I can say this, and it should have more weight.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my major frustrations. And I guess it's not that you would know, or even that we're able to completely delineate this, but I just because I want to know, I would love to know how bona fide these people really are, or if it's just a skin suit they're wearing. Now, one example I could think of that I would be curious to get into is actual politics, but I know that pun, incoming pun, but Ralph Stanley was standing for Obama, at least during one, I can't remember if it was both of his campaigns, but through at least one of them, bluegrass, hanging out with Bill Monroe and all the original guys, Ralph Stanley is saying, "Oh yeah, we should be voting for Obama," and that gets a little bit into the whole art pushing at the edges thing. But I just thought it was an interesting anecdote to try and think that, man, between the gospel albums, between bluegrass, between the general feel of the people that are listening to his music, the whole Ralph Stanley thing kind of threw me there.
Yeah, and it's another way where they've internalized. Not everyone remembers this, but Obama in his first term before he got elected he got caught. I think he was in Pennsylvania, and he was referring to the working class voters in the industrial towns that have been decimated by job losses. And you probably remember this quote, Panda, and many listening remembers, where he'd said, "They get bitter, they cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations." And I just remember when that quote came out, it was, for one, it was the most entirely tone deaf thing I'd heard said about people who had watched their entire towns get decimated, or the mines get shut, and instead of constructive ideas to take them forward, things that would actually solve some problems, the flippant reactions of, well, just learn to code, or just move 500 miles away from everything and your family, and kind of just like, not our problem, Jack. Oh well.
Right. Well,
That
and
just that
he was
insincere.
he was this perfect model of a rootless elite. And so let's just say Hawaii, but he's coming in from he's coming in from Hawaii, and he's hanging out in Chicago, and he can float around and he can move between city to city. And I think my biggest frustration, as you guys have described this, is that these are people that don't listen. And it's doubly wrong if these Hicklibs are legitimate. If it's not just a skin suit, but if they're actually coming from the mines, from the agricultural areas, from the cities that have been decimated in the Rust Belt area by daggum globalization and taking and offshoring our manufacturing. Why aren't these complaints legitimate? And how dare you come from that and say that this doesn't count? And yeah, it is easy for them to take Bruce Springsteen or John Mellencamp or whatever and be like, "Oh, he's just a liberal faggot." Okay, whatever. On this issue, when he's singing about blood on the plow, when they're talking about these towns dying, what are you doing to pay attention to that? Or are you just saying sucks to suck? Let's all go to the burbs and offshore everything.
A real quick point to add to that: the argument could be made that Obama utilized kind of the Hicklib tradition, because do you recall how they incessantly brought up that, well, he comes from, his grandparents are in Kansas, and just that traditional upbringing. They really sold that too. I remember that in the first election, that don't he's not exotic, he's not from Hawaii or wherever. No, he has those Kansas values, from his grandparents.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I don't remember them hitting on it, and I'm sure they did, but I think for me at that point, even Kansas it wasn't a bridge too far, but it was like, Kansas, what? I don't know anything about Kansas, so I don't know. At that point in my life, I think you could have been anywhere outside of a particular ring, like I said, around the Great Lakes, and I would have been like, huh? I don't know anything about that. But
No, exactly.
yeah, and I think, well, frankly, I think that's a part of what we're talking about is let me figure out how to word this, because I don't the problem with the left and the Hicklib in particular tonight is they take a kernel of truth And that kernel of truth is that there is more to life than the town you grew up in, than the region you grew up in, than the accents you grew up around. Yes, there is more out there. But then they go beyond that and they say, and because there's more, we need to take a dump on everything we came from because it's not good enough. I've seen what's good enough. And I'm going to hold in any further rants because I'll just be complaining at that point. Otto, jump in here. What do you think about everything we've been discussing?
Well,
Nothing.
so I'm trying to think where I can go with this. Um, I really don't have much to say yet, I guess. I Yeah, I know you're talking about Ralph Stanley, and I've barely heard. When I say barely heard of him, I've not really heard of him. I'm trying to think what I word this. I know who he is by name, but I don't know what he does. I think he's a bluegrass artist. Mainly, I think of Tyler Childers, who basically,
No, don't tear down my boy.
well, I mean,
You're right. You're right.
I
Everything you're
mean, I
about to
mean,
say is right.
I'm I'm glad that you know what I'm about to say, but basically, it's like, you know, I remember when White House Road came out, and Knows the Grindstone. I don't know what albums any of those are on, but we used to listen to them in high school, and I'd go sit over at people's houses, and they would drink, and I just had to watch. And um,
Good job, Otto.
it was like well, it was like they. I'm trying to think. It's it was like, oh wow, like this is the first get like country artist that really. He's not talking about like should have been a cowboy or whatever. It's like um, it's like real blue collar living because I know some blue collar people and they live rough. So he was celebrated because of that, and then he makes, he has that kind of West Virginia, Kentucky bluegrass theme to it that makes it, little going back to the roots of country. Then he makes either when I'm trying to think, it's either Long Violent History, which is the only album I know of his. It's either that or it's after it when he makes a song with like the gay dudes in the music video. But he basically comes out as a lib. I know in Long Violent History, the album, that's the name of the last song on it too. He has some mention about something about like Breonna Taylor or something on the YouTube, on the YouTube video of it, about how she was this like fellow Kentuckian that was, wrongfully killed by cops. And, I learned something that day that, Breonna Taylor is from Kentucky. I did not know that. I remember when it happened, but I didn't know it was in Kentucky where it occurred. Um, but then ever since then, like I can't. If you bring up Tyler Childers, but you let you listen to him, you get made fun of. But I remember, 3 years ago, it was a good thing, and it was admirable music to listen to, and it was real country. And I also think of Garth Brooks too. Don't even get me started on that. Um, he's had a career of being lib, so
So, Tyler Childers, this is I don't want to go too far down this road. I just want to make sure that it's all tying back into the Hicklib thing. But he's actually he's the latest in a line of guys that I don't know if we want to call them NPR country or how you want to word it. Guys, and their politics is not monolithic. Because if you listen to somebody like Chris Knight, I don't think he has the same politics as John Prine. But I might be wrong on that. But whether it's Stanley or John Prine or Childers or whomever, there is this, and we could go back and we can also talk about, like I said, Mellencamp or Springsteen. These are guys that are recognizing the problem, and you can't listen to especially some of their early albums and tell me they didn't have an idea of what was up. They didn't, at the very least, they didn't see the land crashing down around them, the society crashing down around them. But something in there clicked at some point that if they don't come out and say, and these places are failing because these people are losers, what they do is embrace a solution that doesn't address the problem.
Yes,
That
that's correct. I noticed that. And I'm glad you said it because it kind of sort of categorized something in my mind that had existed that I hadn't been able to put a categorization on. But yeah, you're right. Either Hicklib's going to hate where they're from and leave it, or they're going to embrace some weird form of like, hey guys, look what I found. We can try this new, product, which is, usually communism or
yeah,
some,
yep.
FDR or like republicanism, FDR, New Deal kind of crap,
Yeah, and in the midst of that, they accept all the and you guys know this better than I do, I imagine, but there is, never mind. We're not going to go there right now. That's going to get too much into the weeds. Arthur, where are we at?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that so no one gets confused. This isn't just a liberal from Alabama that lives somewhere else and then just criticizes where they grew up. No, that's just a liberal from Alabama. People can grow up and become liberal progressive, whether they're from the South, the Midwest, or whatnot. There's a very distinct difference of someone getting away from there and then looking at the problems and, like you said, not coming up with any solutions, just kind of voicing the main ideas and still being resentful of the place, but still trying to hold a facade of legitimacy of like, well, that's where I'm from, so I know better than this, and this is why it should go this way.
Sorry, I was waiting to be told to talk.
You're good. But did you have something?
Not really. That's why I was kind of like, uh-oh.
Okay. No, you're good. You're good. Well, and I think so. Arthur, do you see usually that does the Hicklib wear that was going to come out wrong. I was going to say, does he wear cement shoes? I don't mean like that, but I meant like, do they stay in one spot and just raise the flag and bitch and moan, or does, to be a proper Hicklib, do you have to be able to acquire some sort of power, and whether that power is in propaganda, in the ability to write, because I think that's sort of your main focus has been the author and the propagandist. Is that fair?
I would say so. Yeah, for me, it would be the ones, yeah, no cement shoes, but definitely getting into the realms of political commentary, media, journalism, within those fields where they are speaking to the masses, or they, of course, have a voice and kind of utilize where they came from as a mantle of credibility while still tearing it down. And there is an opposite to that too. I mean, I also wanted to bring up Joe Badgett, a author. He passed away a little over 10 years ago, but he was from West Virginia, uh, left the state, joined the military, but became a prolific writer. And I would say his most famous work, or a work that most people would know, was he came out with a book in 2007 called Deer Hunting with Jesus. And it was a kind of a polemic on rural life, the ideas of Republicans. Remind you, this was the Bush years, of course. And so it was a critique, and it was a critique on the pathologies of rural life, the things that are not working. Obviously, hillbilly heroin and and of course that was if not at the height of the oxy crisis, it was definitely in the hot years of that had been finally noticed, and it was of course just decimating Appalachia. And he notes that, and he also notes the economics and stuff, but he did it in a way that was the uh, not the HR cat lady scolding, saying, "Look, I'm from here. You know better than this, and this is your problem. Once again, you just need to move 500 miles away, or your community just needs to die, or it needs to be replaced by half of Bangladesh. They'll work harder anyway." No, it was actual real solutions. And yeah, he was. I would say he was a classical liberal in that fashion. Definitely not too extreme on the progressivism that we've seen in the last 15 years or so. He knew what a woman was. I know that. But that's the very stark difference between what you can say, like a David French example or a Kevin Williamson example, to Joe Badgett. That there is a distinction there, especially how they come across. And yeah, Badgett did in the book here and there, of course, saying, "I'm in my hometown. These are people I grew up with, and this is what they're facing." But it was all in the treatment of how he viewed his state, his hometown, the people there, the importance of family ties to the land, and the importance of traditions. And while I didn't agree with all his solutions, there was some things you could take out of it and say, yeah, yeah, that could be good, but it's definitely not. Let's turn, West Virginia into parts of Los Angeles, or let's make this. That's not the solution at all. And he didn't do that either. He pointed out like actual things that could work.
Yeah,
To use the words
there is
red
something I
state.
want to dig into here in a few minutes, but first I wanted to read what Milton Whitaker wrote, and he said, to use the words of the immortal Distributus, red states are low status and blue states aren't. Doesn't this adequately describe the lion's share of the Hicklibs' motivation? What do you guys think?
Oh, definitely, definitely high status, low status. I think that plays a huge part into it. Mhm. Seeing that just from personal experiences, going back home and talking with people and showing they're like, oh yeah, well, so and so is doing really good here and stuff. They're like, yeah, but they didn't even leave the state. They're still here. I'm like, well, you don't have to
Right.
leave to be successful.
Yep.
And of course, and they point at me and say, well, you moved. I'm like, well yeah, I joined the military. There wasn't a base in the hometown to stay at. So,
Right.
you know, and yeah. Oh yeah. And it's seen as higher status, especially you'll even see mothers and stuff talk about like, Billy's doing great. Billy's up in, whatever big city. And then you ask, does Billy ever come visit you at all?
Hmm.
Oh, he's just so busy. He's so busy. He can't get away from his work. And then you're like, well, what does he do exactly? Well, he works at a car dealership. He's in the accounting, the finance area. I'm like,
Yeah.
they get time off. He's just not
Right.
seeing you.
Well,
Yeah,
so
that's.
go for it, Otto.
Oh, I was gonna say that's something I've definitely noticed about a lot of people I know that they move up north or they move out west and they do it is like like I just kind of wanted to like go see the world, and it's like no, what they actually want to do is they wanted to escape and never come back because they don't. Or here the big thing is moving to the beach. A lot of people move to the beach basically to forget that they lived in the middle of nowhere, and it's not good. I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah. Well, it makes me question some of what I had written you guys over this past week when we were talking about the whole Hicklib idea, because I had said I just don't run into these people. I don't see these people, and I was trying to think where to locate them. But the more you guys are talking, makes me wonder if you do reach a point in the rural locale that you're in where you don't see the Hicklib, but that's because they've just moved. They've left and they won't be coming back. And so it's a double-edged sword there, in that you don't want somebody in your town dragging you down and always complaining and up in front of the town council or zoning committee or anything else. But the other part of that is, yeah, in their wake, that is, there are folks out here that their kids have left, and they've left the farm and they've left the county, and they will not be back. So sometimes they'll be here for Christmas, or maybe Christmas and Easter, whatever, and then some of them just will not be coming back. So if you want to see them, you got to go catch them. You got to catch them in Buffalo and New York City or Minneapolis or wherever.
I know a guy in particular I'm thinking of who left my town to 2 hours up north, and he thinks he's, or sorry, more about 3 or 4 hours up north, and he thinks he really, really got away from the South. And I hate to break it to him, but this guy's got probably 500 more miles of South up north of him.
Well, but if you're talking about the city I'm thinking you're talking about, that's not the South. I mean, it is.
It's not the one you're thinking of. It's not.
Okay.
It's not the one you're thinking of.
Okay. Fair enough. Oh man, anyway, I guess that's for offline. But yeah, so that was one thing. Is I think that's probably why I'm sitting back here saying, "Well, I just don't see these people." And I think you guys made a good point. I think they probably they up and left, and so that's a part of it. Here's one for you though. As we're talking too, I'm thinking about. Have you guys read Hillbilly Elegy?
Nope.
I read parts of it, but I didn't read the whole book.
So it makes me wonder. I'm thinking I need to go back and reread it and sort of do a vibe check on it, because I'm wondering, as I remember it, I don't remember Vance writing as if he was a Hicklib, but he certainly at that point when he wrote it was a never Trumper. And so I don't know, just out of curiosity's sake, I would wonder what it would be like to go back and work through it again. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on Vance or anybody else who's on the Republican side who offers critiques.
I would say that I just trust Vance in the sense of, you might have had a pet dog that bit you really bad once the first time you got it, and it just kind of stopped and hasn't since, but it never showed any signs of it might stop. I guess what I mean with that is that Vance was a never Trumper, and I don't know. I mean, he seems genuine in a lot of the stuff he does. At the time, he probably was a Hicklib. I know West Virginia, that area, like I think it's Morgantown where University of West is, and that town I think is one of the most liberal places in the state, like openly liberal. It's kind of like Asheville, North Carolina, which I'm pretty sure just you know caused a horde of 1,000 screaming banshees to loathe the existence of Asheville, also known as Sodom and Gomorrah. Apparently, it's that bad. I don't know where I was going with that. Vance is all right, I guess, for right now.
Yeah, and I'm not counter signaling him. I just think it's interesting. But I also think you hit on something big there. What is, from your guys' perspective, what do you think is up with Asheville, with UNC, with give me some other ones that are in the South,
Georgia
different
Tech,
parts of
maybe?
Atlanta, and what's that?
Maybe a Georgia Tech or a Vanderbilt.
Sure.
I mean, I could think of a really liberal one that's small. I can think it, but it's kind of
right.
It's kind of personal.
Yeah, I'm thinking not. Oh, it's not Auburn. What's the one that just had the fella screaming about Kirk and how he was supposed to be dead or whatever? Tuck on it. But
that was in Texas.
Yeah, Texas
okay.
is really bad. Austin's horrible.
Well, truth be told, I don't know much about TCU. Is TCU super liberal?
I mean, at this point, you have to look at the academic institutions as 90% of them.
Yeah.
They're captured institutions. You know, the march through the colleges. Anyone who studied the history of it saw that started out decades ago, and it's almost just a complete full capture at this point.
So how does that play
And
into the Hicklib phenomena? Do you think they're producing them, or at the very least they're helping them sharpen their knives, or how do you guys think that
I
education plays into it?
I mean 100% because, and I'm not going to go into the weeds on this one, but just look at how they teach the American history now. Look at the sharp turn it is of, I mean, they took away the colleges in itself. The entire system took out the requirement to even take Western civilization as a required course in the mid 80s. And of course, so then when you look back to across the South and in the rural areas, any of these college towns, they're not teaching, you know, I can guarantee it's not coming into this idea of, you know, manifest destiny. No, that was evil. Okay. Well, this conflict, well, when you deconstruct this and look at it from this angle, and it's not about not telling the full story, it's about you're not deconstructing anything. What you're doing is you're placing in a narrative and you're putting basically the Anglo-Saxon American on the bad, you know, on the bad side every time on everything. I mean, just look to the conquest of North America in the Indian Wars. Yeah, you'll hear about Wounded Knee 1,000 times in a class, but they'll not talk about Fort Mims, and they won't talk about the Indian depredations in Texas. They won't discuss the Comanches raiding Mexico City, and you know, just everything that was going on. You don't get a full picture. So I know that has to tie into creating that mind, that worldview and mindset of someone who grows up in an area, go to a school, get told almost on every single subject and an aspect that, well, actually, you and people that look like you were on the bad side of this. So, of course, when they get to wherever they're at, they're going to have, it gives them kind of that negative self image. And especially more so when you're already from regions of the country that just in my lifetime, the impression has taken a huge difference in how it's portrayed.
So here's one, and this reminds me of something I was thinking about earlier. Are these just are Hicklibs just the are they by and large the southern expression of the soldiers for the way things are nowadays? Are they just the enforcers of the current thing, and they're the southern expression of that?
I think they're janissaries, but I think they're
Well,
a
now that
full-on
that
Hopi
word's a little bit
janissaries.
that word's a little bit veiled. So spread that out. Explain that for everybody listening.
Well, maybe not janissary is the right word to use, but they're definitely a type of, you could say, forlorn hope or vanguard, in a sense of these were the first people that were converted to something that was outside the realm. And usually most of them sit out there kind of isolated, and they don't, they find their little groups, they go play D&D, whatever. But I know some people that are, normal, they would say they're conservative, but then you actually start pressing down on them. It's like, well, they affirm things such as, homosexuality or buggery. Um, they're okay with premarital sex. They're kind of lenient in their views towards drugs, kind of sort of just, Christianity, like, like, take the family to church. Hope your kids become Christian. But we don't really care. And also, they like to, get hammered. And so there's a ton of people that already, and Jack Milton has said this before, the Bible Belt is not the Bible Belt. It's the Bible Belt because it used to be the Bible Belt. It's not a current. It's a was kind of thing, not a is. And so I think the Hicklib thing is actually going to start kind of dying off when you have more of these people kind of being, enculturated by the liberal zeitgeist of the nation. And also, too, on that, and a good metric that a friend gave me one time, and we came up with this on a hunting trip. Kind of funny that we're talking about this while we're hunting, but we kind of theorized that places like the deep south, so like parts of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, maybe the South. We think it was the South. Um, they in small towns age or lapse about 15 to 20 years difference. So let me think of an example of something real quick, if I can monologue. Um,
Hey,
Go ahead, Arthur. I'm gonna think.
uh, oh yeah, I was saying while you're thinking on that, I've got to get off the stream. Once again, thank you, Panda, for having me on. Sorry I couldn't stay longer, but really interesting topic, and I think there's a lot more to mine here, and I'm gonna finish up that essay, and I'll let you know when I get it done. Y'all take care.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, Arthur. We appreciate it, and yeah, I think you gave us a lot to chew on this evening. So you take care.
Take care, Arthur. Get some rest. I guess where I was gonna go with that is to go back to the homosexual relationship discussion, because it's the most current thing I can think of, because it's one of those things that has been a huge social um, social classification that has basically been extended and broadened in my lifetime. And so I remember in middle school, in elementary school, when this stuff, I guess middle school more, when it basically was getting legalized across the country, and they had the whole, rainbow White House thing. And so fast forward about like 15 years later, approximately. Um, and now you get people who are basically kind of sort of okay with it because their family members are coming out. It's the same with the trans stuff. Is this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It it builds with people, and also like people's opinions on things like race and stuff, or are they okay with things like interracial marriage? I've noticed that it's starting to it doesn't like just like flick like like that. It it takes some time, and I don't know if it's because people are exposed to this when they're like in elementary or middle school, and then they're and let me be quite frank right here. Just because interracial marriage is not a sin. Um, Obviously, I think people should try to reproduce with people that they're like. I know I certainly want that, but I want to be clear that I don't believe, and I've not been pointed to anywhere in scripture that it's a sin. Anyway, where I was really going with that is that people in their depravity, and the majority of humanity has fallen, lost, and will not being eternity with God in his form of love, which is heaven. They'll be damned to hell. um to me, it seems like those people are susceptible to being transformed into whatever liberal nightmare. I don't even call it liberal, just whatever current zeitgeist monster beast you know they become. And I know I'm monologuing, but I haven't figured out if it's that some people just see something and it speaks to their depraved nature and they just become something, like we're seeing with this Tyler Russell dude that took down Charlie, or if it is a gradual exposure or an exposure to as a young age, and when they reach maturity, they become ingrained in that lifestyle or that thinking.
Yeah, and that's interesting points there on what drives them to it. As you guys were talking, one of the things that I kept coming back to is I wonder to be trite and cynical about it, and to not assume good faith on the part of these folks. And I think this ties into the idea that folks, Mm, folks in rural areas. Folks in rural areas are, again, we'll say, like you guys had talked about, they're 15 to 20 years behind, and so there is almost this wave of, well, it's the adoption curve, and for once it hits peak, the rural areas are sitting at the top of the adoption curve, and so all of the cosmopolitan groups through the suburbs, they've all been exposed to this, and then all of a sudden at its peak in the adoption curve, the rural areas are finally exposed to it. And then so the cynical part is that they are able to, assuming these people are not acting in good faith, they're able to jump in and grab some sort of power within this zeitgeist. But as you mentioned, by the time the rural folks do it, then you can almost expect that we're already on the downturn. And so that would mean that the Hicklib is a potential indicator of the good times coming. Now, what frustrates that a little bit is technology right now and how quickly that technology can be reached and can be utilized. But I think even now, there's probably still something to that idea of the Hicklib being the indicator of the zeitgeist changing, because the other part would be that, well, never mind. You're just thinking contrasts and opposites, and you'll see where I was going to go with that. Anyways, no, I think the idea of the expansion of ideas and the adoption curve, I think you're onto something there,
And
and
no,
I
oh, go
think,
ahead.
no, it's fine. I was just going to say I think that's indicative of the timelines we're on, and I think I was just going to repeat myself. So go
Oh
ahead,
no, oh no, you're
jump
good.
in.
I was gonna say that the one thing of a Hicklib that I really think about is somebody that I actually had some time with in my university years, and he was from a more rural place than I am, and he was insistent and insistent upon the Union Army and the Civil War. Just loved them to death, was autistic about them and about researching them and all this. And it came from some kind of, I guess, Southern guilt. I mean, this guy was trying to, go out of every effort he could to um to find ancestors that fought for the Union. Obviously, he can only find them like on his mom's side because his mom was from like up north or something, and it was just a really weird thing to watch. And him talking about his hometown, it was sort of kind of like he seemed like to me the Hicklib that couldn't escape in a way, though he did. He did escape. Um,
I
but I
like that.
I know one that that didn't escape. I guess I know more of them than I think. I just don't think about him a lot outside of the stuff. But he's very big on in fact, he was so big on the Union Army that he basically like would go he he would talk about, well, like we need to honor our southern troops that fought for the north in the Civil War. And he's very big about like there was the 4th Alabama Cav that fought with General Sherman at the Battle of Atlanta and all this crap. And it's like, yeah, those guys might have been from I think it was Wilcox or Walker. I think it was Winston County. They're from Winston County, which is like northwest Alabama. It's like he was obsessed with them, but it's like that was a small fraction of the average, you know, Confederate population that fought for that. It was probably out of a county that might have had some, economic reasons for not siding with the South, but from my understanding, they didn't mount any real resistance. Sure, some, regiment was formed out of there, but there was probably just, the same amount of men or more pulled into a larger Confederate unit. So it's kind of, it's kind of null and void. That's like saying that, oh, there's people in Afghanistan that are not the Taliban. It's like, Okay, sure. Well, guess who runs Afghanistan? The Taliban. So it's just kind of a mute point. Um, I guess where was I? I kinda wanted to bring up that point because it's just a really funny story that has it it just makes me think because that guy had a whole host of other problems that were more spiritual than, political. I mean, I guess you could, equate the 2. I mean, when you're living a depraved lifestyle, I imagine your politic is not gonna be, the most up to date in terms of IQ points and, thinking about what's right.
Well, now that brings up an interesting point. Ooh, so we could go a certain way. How familiar are you with folk horror?
Folk horror, like,
Folk horror,
explain.
like The Wicker Man, like The Witch, like Blood on Satan's Claw.
Well, I'm not familiar with those in the fact that I've watched I mean, I've heard of The Wicker Man, but
Okay.
are you about to go down the route that Survived the Jive? I don't know if you know who he is. He stated that you notice in a lot of, what I'm just gonna call, Eastern backed Hollywood, if you know what I mean, they are or desert backed Hollywood or desert ran Hollywood, tribal ran Hollywood, they are they ethnically are not, of the burg, of the town, of the folk, and to them, the scariest place is, the rural white, village, and when that's actually one of
So
the safest places you could be.
there mm, yes and no. So I haven't seen my horror is very limited. And that's intentional on my part. Uh I've never been into the blood and gore and never found that particularly interesting. But folk horror I find incredibly interesting. And a big part of that is for the way in which it interacts with the community. And I think there is something there potentially. So I'm a little bit familiar with Survive the Jive, and he said some interesting things, but uh, yeah, with folk horror, I think there is this interesting aspect of Hicklibbery that looks at how these places were expressing themselves and the underlying frustrations with it. However, going back to what were talking about when you were talking about degeneracy and moving into different areas, I think I think those movies portray, or at least have a kernel of truth into the idea that you don't have to be you don't have to be any sort of any sort of leftist to engage in some form of degeneracy. That's not totally true because you can make the argument that any form of degeneracy is a form of leftism. But what I'm saying also is, I guess I'm talking about the dirtbag right, so to speak, and that would be a fun stream. Except the frustration there is when you start getting into friend enemy distinctions, you don't want to counter signal any portion of the right too hard. But for example, the idea of this lake that's out here and folks that are coming out onto my lake and flying their flags saying "fuck Joe in the hoe," and just this ribald beer party. It's not a pure form of ethno nationalism sentiment. It's not anything like that. But it is this sort of, we're Republicans, give us our rights, and let us engage in whatever tomfoolery we want because you have no power over me. And so there is there is this there's an expression of people that aren't doing themselves any favors, but that is distinct from the Hicklibbery and the solutions that the Hicklib offers. So I'm just saying that because I was listening to you talk about degeneracy and things of that nature, and I think it's valid, but I don't think that can't be the exclusive lens by which we look at this stuff, because there is a form of rightist, depending on our argument, who is still operating in a dirtbag fashion. And so it's how do we interact with them, and how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? Not necessarily the person, but the wheat from the chaff is in where they're oriented and what their actions are.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, especially because there are some people of the what I call the thought right, in the sense of people that actually, think and have brain cells. And I'm not talking about like oh, like, your boomer uncle or something that like thinks like I know what's up. Like I know
I
what's up.
have
I'm talking about
no,
more like
yeah, but well, let's. I am pretty sure I have an idea of who you're talking about, but let's not go with names tonight.
okay, okay. Well, I'm not insinuating anybody that that may or may not, it could be it could be a grandfather or I'm just using a random example. Um, but like they sometimes these people they they think they know what's up, whatever, but it's like they don't actually know what's up. They're not really thinking. They just kind of have a higher IQ to be able to take what Fox News says and run the math with it better. But where I was going on was somebody maybe more like a BAP who Bronze Age pervert, somebody that I don't agree with. I guess he's on the right wing or people of his sphere. And I just think that at least those people they're thinking, you know, they're on the right. They're definitely, or maybe not BAP anymore, but some people of his sphere probably cancelable, would probably assist them if they were attacked by a mob of lefties. But um, there is a section point where the world that I see is more like a Oliver Cromwell, and the world they see is more like a like let the strong and the people that are smart kind of sort of do what they want to, and the rules only apply to the lower classes. Whereas obviously, we know that's not how things work, but that's neither here nor there. Um, that's kind of where I was going with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's valid critique. Unfortunately, because because of the state of things, there circles have to be drawn and lines have to be drawn, but some of these circles are conditional. Some of these lines only need to be discussed in private, and so that's all. But I think you're onto that. I think I'm trying to work out still within this Hicklib paradigm what that means, and if we're going to see. Well, so riddle me this: what do you think the opposite of the Hicklib is? Is there an opposite, some sort of a cognate?
Um, I guess you could kind of tout it as being an opposite to an extent, but I like to think of the entrenched right winger in libland. I mean, think of like basically like a I mean like a fascist that's in like Chicago, or like a Klansman. Not let's not use Klansman because they're a Fed organization.
That's
Um,
they're
but
feds.
but like I don't know, like a neo Confederate. Like when I say I'm more trying to just get the vibe out than the be literal with it. So like like white nat, wignat, like neo Fed, not you know what I mean. Dude, like in like San Diego. like, something like that. I guess that'd be the opposite. I think typically
Sure.
you're going to find that more with older people, but also the younger, especially men, you know, that are a little bit younger than me are trending to be, from my understanding, extremely right wing in the sense of, they want the world to work in a certain way. They want families, they want wives, they want this and that. Not that they're exactly maybe more religious or whatever, but they're willing to maybe sacrifice what we've been taught is freedom in exchange for what the vast majority of humans have lived. And we know that people in medieval Europe were probably a lot happier than people that are living in like Chicago eating bugs and whatever. That's no diss on Chicago itself, but you get what I'm trying to
Oh,
kind of explain a
you could dish
character.
Chicago. Why would we not dish Chicago?
Well, we have a faction up there, I guess. So I don't want to speak too
Well,
bad on them. But it's like
well,
but
that's
it's
I
but it's like
I think I think they would delineate what it is you're saying because yeah, Thomas is up there and Thomas is great,
that's what
right?
I'm thinking of.
Is it? Yeah, absolutely. That's no shade on him, and that's no shade on Chi Town as he would describe it. But we're just talking about Chicago, the dumping ground of the libs within the greater Midwest.
Yeah, and where was I going? I was going somewhere with some of this that I guess that, there are people that, exist in that counter network. I mean, think about if you're like like not woke and you live in New England, like that's gotta be kinda, impressive. You're somebody that basically didn't swallow the Puritan pill fully, and you basically are like anti-founding father or something, and you're, woke on race. When I say woke on race, I don't mean woke in the left sense, awakened. And, maybe you also understand that the freedoms that the system that has, been birthed out of the creation of the United States, we realize that those freedoms are not really real or compatible with real life. And that, at the end of the day, there are some things that are worth not, even writing on paper. And we know that there are rules, and some rules apply to some, and some rules don't apply to some.
Yeah, and that's nonsense we're living in. So I'm looking for something right now, and I may have found it, but I think the I think the big thing is that we are potentially the I still the more I think about it, the more I think you're probably onto something, and that the Hicklib is the harbinger, is the indicator of the paradigm shift. Because again, even through the 20th century, the fact that it took so long for information to get out and for ideas to be distributed throughout the United States, throughout the various countries, into the rural areas, you know so the prudentialist, boy, actually he would be an interesting guy to have on right now to talk about this, because he talks about how, sure, it's great that your kids are riding a horse to their high school, but um, they've got their smartphones in their hands, and they're willing to be able to just dig into stuff, and so culture is immediately getting splashed in their face. And I think that's true. I'm thinking, and it could just be that I'm hoping naively, that there was enough lag, though, that we're not totally going to be dealing with that, because they got their smartphones, the Zoomers and the Alpha now, on the outskirts in the hinterlands. They got their smartphones and they got access to everything so late in the game. And plus, I really buy into Ed Dutton and the idea that a lack of Darwinian pressures is a Darwinian pressure in itself. And so there is going to be some frustrations with continuing the game as it's being played right now. But I think I'm really starting to buy into this idea that the Hicklib is again an indicator of the downward swing. But before we start closing this up and making getting on with our night, I'm trying to see if I can pull something up and finally. Okay, guys, we're almost there. Bear with me as we're doing this live. I got to get this screen share going. Let's see. So there are. Okay. Okay, perfect. Otto, have you read this essay?
Let me
This
see. I'm
Blue
trying
Eyes
to.
Red Heart. So
I don't
it's from
think
Dave the
so.
Distributus. It's letters from Fiddler's Green. So he has this essay, one which everybody needs to read. And it's this idea of how we are supposed to be operating in our current paradigm. We can appreciate the hinterlands. We can even be somewhat oriented to them, but we have to be aware of what's going on in the city. And so the OGC is good about this. You know, they're always pressing the idea of the elite. This essay is fantastic. And besides that, if you jump onto the Distributist channel, he actually has a video, Blue Eyes Red Heart, that digs into all of this. And have you ever seen The Warriors?
I
It's an old
haven't,
70s
but
movie.
there's
Okay.
there's like a '90s song that I think it's like you got to keep them separated or something. I think that is about the movie. I think I mean
Oh,
I think so. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I'm
you
pretty
mean
sure.
Come Out and Play? Come
Yeah,
Out and
yeah,
Play
that's
by The
yeah,
Offspring?
yeah. I think I've heard that song is actually
That
about
is,
that movie.
oh, I didn't even know that. If Whit was still on here, he'd be able to square
Yeah,
us away on
I
that.
was gonna say that
Okay.
somebody needs to look that up, but I'm like 80% sure that I heard something about that somewhere. That's what it was about.
Yeah. So definitely, if you are listening to this at some point this week or tonight, go and do it tonight. Go and do it right after the stream ends, which will be here in just a few minutes. But go read this essay, dig into this. And then there was another one that I need to find. So Thomas actually said something, I don't know, here within, it might have been like 3 weeks ago or something. And I'd like to find it, but I'm not going to do that to everybody on the stream. Then wait for me to find it. I'm going to carefully paraphrase here. But the idea was that there were guys in the 90s who ran off to Hickland and acted big and tough. And it was just a LARP because they really had nothing on the line. And so whereas guys like Thomas and other fellas that were actually there in Chicago, in the big cities, in the areas where they had something to lose, they were truly in the fight. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so while we can be blessed to live outside of particular areas, you know, I think we do need to recognize that the fight is there in the city. And so that would sort of be my thoughts. I don't know that it's a proper opposite to the Hicklib, but there has to be a recognition on the part of the people that live in rural America that the actual fight, like we can LARP and we can think, oh, we're going to be the next Bundy Ranch and whatever, and God forbid it ever gets to that point. But before it ever reaches way out to you in the lands that nobody really cares about, the fight's going to be going on there in DC, in New York City, in Chicago, in Milwaukee, in Atlanta, so on and so forth. All the biggest cities in your state will have to be dealing with this. And so recognize the guys that are there. And then, like you were talking about earlier, find the guys that are building chapters in these areas. And whether that's the OGC, whether that is even I'm harping on the Chamber of Commerce and the local stuff, just because even if you're a dog catcher in a small town, I think that's a whole lot better than nothing. And so, yes, the OGC, that's good and that's pointed and that's has an emphasis. But I remember I went not back and forth as if we were arguing, but John Slaughter and I, we were talking, and it's like, go to the local mom and pop's restaurants, especially if you are trying to build in that county, build in that area. Rub elbows with the people that are on the ground, rub elbows with the local business owners, and just try to insert yourself in your community, which frankly is in a lot of ways the exact opposite of the Hicklib we were discussing earlier. The person who lifts their nose up in the air, escapes, and then has nothing good to say about where they came from.
That's why we are better than them.
That's okay. Well, that's
Well, it's true. I mean,
yes,
we shouldn't run out on our people.
What's that?
Well, we shouldn't run out on our people.
Oh no, you're 100% right there. I just the better than them threw me for a second.
I guess I'm known for throwing people on a loop.
No, I mean it's things are multifaceted, and so it's like you have to think in 3D. Is so yeah, you weren't making a. Anyways, that's why those particular actions are better than their actions. Yes, because you have to care for your family. You have to take care of your own. And frankly, okay, we'll go here and then we'll close it up. But it's Otto, talk for a minute because I'm looking something up.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, I mean, you need to support your local mom and pop business or get in wherever you can. My only fear though is that we're not doing this just to achieve some kind of power over these people, but we're genuinely trying to do this to keep these. I mean, most of these small towns in America, they basically were growing or were stabilized up until after the Second World War. So historically, these towns have always kind of been existing, and I think we owe it to our ancestors that lived in them or whatnot to basically do what we can to protect these communities, keep them safe, see that they grow. I'm thinking about that too. I drive through a lot of these really rural areas, and I see the people that live in these houses and outside of them. A lot of them are older, and I genuinely have thought about when these people die off in the next 40 years, what's going to happen to these houses, to this land? Are people going to move out here, or is it going to start? Are we going to go through a period where it's like a great ruralization, where you're just the rural areas just become more and more rural and less populated, which I think is going to happen. And I think that's going to be something interesting to see. I mean, I guess it already kind of is. I mean, when you go down to somewhere like, way South Alabama, I mean, there's just nothing there.
That's a really interesting argument. We'll have to talk about that on a different stream, because I think I actually take the opposite view of that. But that also depends. It depends on the demographics and the particular cohort we're talking about. Because I think, well, to put all my cards on the table, I think there's going to be a fire sale on farmland within the next 20 years.
So you
But
mean you think people are going to
that's
buy it more? There's going to be a big.
no. I think there's going to be a glut of farmland on the market, and I actually think it's going to cause the prices to go down.
Oh wow.
But yeah, well, that's for another stream. Uh, anyways, what I did want to jump into is 1 Timothy 5:8. As we were talking, absolutely reminded of this. So I've got a bunch of versions up here. I'm going to read from the King James. But if any provide not for his own, and specifically for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. And I think that sums up exactly what we've been talking about and why it is that the Hicklib is such an odorous entity.
Nobody likes traitors in their back or their
No.
midst. And I'm glad you ended off with 1 Timothy 5:8 because that's a verse people don't think about. And I mean, quite frankly, a lot of the evangelical, and I know we're about to go off, so I'm not going to go on a rant. But like the evangelical community that's so big about Bible first, they really don't even read the Bible, and they're just all about emotionalism. So it's kind of sort of null and void unless you truly understand the Word of God.
Yeah. Well, there is a I'm going to be thinking about that throughout the week, that there is this aspect to Hicklibery that is just in the most cynical way. It's looking at power and it's interacting with power. And then the most graceful way I could put it, if I'm not being cynical, is that they genuinely believe. But man, it's a hard place for me to get to. I'm not really sure how you could believe that warm apple pie and coming home to family reunions and throwing horseshoes in the back and trying to keep those things around. I'm not sure how you could get to the point in your
Well,
life to say that's a bad thing.
when you have a violent drug and porn addiction, and you like to eat bugs and stuff and live in the pod, I mean, it doesn't matter.
That's it. Okay, so maybe I am understanding you better what you were saying. Or so yeah, just that they. Oh, that's it. Okay, so let me see if I can repeat what you're saying. That their lives, that they left the area they're from, and they embraced such a strong form of hedonism that the life that they were taking part in prior to the embracing of their hedonism is just ugly because it doesn't allow their hedonism. Did I get that?
I guess. I mean, I
Okay.
clearly think of an example of a guy that basically moved off. He was one of the people I referenced earlier, and
Yeah.
he just kind of sort of lives wild, and he posts about it. And
Yep.
I knew him in high school, and he was kind of a sort of a normal dude, but now he posts about basically he wants I'm not gonna be detailed, but basically he wants these like pornographed pornographed versions of women to basically like do things to him. And it's
Oh,
like,
good
why?
lord.
It's like, dude, why don't you want to get like married and
Yeah.
maybe? Well, I'm just gonna leave it there. He needs to be married. I'll just put it that way.
Well, I mean, respectfully, does he? He does eventually, but golly, he's got to clean up before you want a woman with him.
Exactly.
Yep. Fair enough. Yeah, I'll tell you something offline too. So I guess we'll leave that hanging. Oh, before I end, next week, if everything goes according to plan, we should have a fire episode. So keep that in mind. If everything goes according to plan, I will be posting throughout the upcoming week. So preparing for that. Otto, you got anything to shill for?
Not really. I mean, people pretty much know where to find me at. I know I put out a poll on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
that people want me to start writing Substack again, so they get what they want. And You
The
know,
people get what they want.
they get what they want this time.
Okay.
So, hopefully, I'm about to crack open the laptop and get going, which I was encouraged to
Good.
do this anyway. But, and I've got some stuff down. I just, I'm one of those people that, I'm lazy, but if I get plugged in, I can go. But I'm hopefully
Okay.
make some lifestyle changes here soon that will divvy out to getting back on the Substack.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And I realized too that when I said it's going to be a big one next week, I didn't announce the subject. It's going to be on military music and more of how do we dig into that, what's being expressed, what are the people that are writing the lyrics, or even the music itself, what are they really trying to push through with that. And I think I have a fantastic guest lined up, and so we will try and dig into that next week. With all that having been said, we are out for the evening.